Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CFO Connect event. We're very happy to be organizing this event tonight with the team of MacroFin. We'll be talking about ERP implementation. I'll give you a few minutes to allow people to log in, although we're already 3 minutes late. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat on the right-hand side, so we know who's here, say hello. We always like to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please share that information just to see, hi, Carlos from Portugal, how international the community is. So on the right-hand side, as I was saying, just a little bit of logistics on Livestorm. You have the chat. You also have a questions tab. So there will be a formal Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but really feel free to shoot your questions since the beginning, and our amazing speakers will try to answer them on the go. Hi, everyone. Hi, James, Jeremy, Jonas, Bertrand, Heiko, Constantin. So we have a pretty nice international crowd, as always, but thanks again for joining us this evening. So I'm going to present myself. My name is Christine, and I'm on the community team at CFO Connect. So CFO Connect is a community for finance leaders, as you may know. But for those who are joining us for the first time, we have chapters all over Europe and in the US. And really our ambition with CFO Connect is allow finance leaders to meet, discuss, and share their challenges, their objectives, and really ramp up as a finance leader even more. So CFO Connect was created by Spendesk, and Spendesk is a spend management software for finance leaders. So if ever you're interested in learning more also about our product, feel free to check it out. And today, we're going to talk about rapid ERP implementation. We know that it's a hot subject for a lot of startups, scale-ups, or just growing businesses. And it's a huge pain point in general. And so today we're very happy to be organizing this event with MacroFin and with Steve and Ross. I'll let them introduce themselves and then kick off this event.
Great, thank you. I'm Ross. I'm the COO and CFO at MacroFin. I got my chartered accounting and MBA qualifications in Australia before moving over to the UK, where I met Steve. I've worked in senior finance roles for over 10 years. I've led teams through digital change when implementing new systems, and also organizational and team structure change. So at MacroFin, I head up the project delivery. I use my experience as an accountant to help solve some of the complex challenges and process issues our clients have, as well as leading the joint client and MacroFin project team through the project and helping the end users through the change they're going through. And also as CFO at MacroFin, I can relate to some of the challenges directly, as I face some of those challenges as we're scaling up our business as we grow. And on this presentation, I think it's ideal if you're considering the move to an ERP and want to start preparing, or you're at the start of your project, and there's some key tips we can provide to help get that project off well.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry, and hi, I'm Steve Campbell, so co-founder with Ross and sales and technical lead for MacroFin. So like Ross, I was an accountant for 10 years as well, but prior to that, I had a master's in computer programming. So based on that experience, I got pulled into a lot of ERP implementations during my time as an accountant. I did SAP, Dynamics, Financial Force, and NetSuite twice as a customer. And so I experienced a lot of issues, which then kind of led to us kind of setting up MacroFin to try and resolve some of those. And then, so Faustine, if you could just go forward a slide then, just to kind of introduce MacroFin. So yeah, so as I said, we set up MacroFin to kind of fix what the issues that I experienced, some of them being the people implementing it tended to be from an IT background only and could sometimes struggle to kind of understand some of the business processes that we required, maybe things like technical revenue recognition, and I would have to get very involved to kind of make sure those parts of the project went well. And then the training that we'd receive, I never really felt that it was quite enough for us to be self-sufficient and get the most out of the system after we've gone live. So when we were setting up, we decided to focus on NetSuite. As I said, I bought it twice as a customer. So we found that it was the best system that I'd used. And NetSuite has a methodology called Suite Success, which is well suited to kind of rapid implementation, as there's a lot of reports and dashboards and best practices out of the box. So we've worked with over 60 clients in the last 3 years. And our team is kind of made up of a mix of former end users of the system, accountants who have been in senior finance roles, and then former NetSuite consultants. We're cut over in data experts. In our careers as accountants, we've had to work an awful lot with data, and we found on implementation, this is an area that we can add a lot of value, and Ross is going to talk about data later. We're leaders in rapid go live. Our typical go live is 4 months. But part of that is because we know that most of the people we're implementing for have day jobs as financial controllers, and they're having to implement this as well. So we want to kind of give the implementation of breathing space to get used to the system, learn it, and not put too much stress asking for data, etc. During it. But we've implemented much quicker than that up to a couple of weeks. And then in part, we have a very agile approach to how we do the implementation. Again, as we know, people have day jobs. There isn't one timeline or methodology that's going to work for every single client. So we try to work with our clients to find one that will work for them. And that's that. So some of the points that we're going to go through today. So choosing the right implementation partner, preparing your data for the migration, being agile in scoping requirements for go live, building a strong project team, considering your reporting requirements, and then developing your training and change management. So I'm just going to start with choosing your partner. So one of the things I get asked, as I join all the pre-sales for MacroFin, one of the things I get asked all the time is I want to go live as quickly as possible, but I don't feel that customers quite understand what goes into kind of getting live. It's just, okay, you guys get us live as quickly as possible, but there is a lot of work on the client side. So we're hoping to kind of have this talk to kind of explain some of those points. The first one, choosing a partner, and it's probably the most obvious one from who's speaking to you today, but I really do feel that it's really important. There's a lot of good systems out there, but I think a lot of it does come down to how it's implemented. You could have 2 people here today who've had the same system implemented, but one will say it's terrible and one will say it's great, just because one is getting the automations and the reporting that they needed from it, and the other just didn't have quite as good an implementation of it. I worked with a previous client they were live on the system, and they said to me, "How can you recommend this system? And how do you like working with it? Because it's really bad." And it turned out they were using 10% of the actual system. They weren't getting any of the reports. They didn't even have bank reconciliations turned on. And so we worked with them to kind of get all of that stuff, and they're much happier with it now. But they will acknowledge that they weren't ready to implement as well. They had audit going on, other requirements. They didn't have the team in place to actually be able to deliver it either. So it is a two-way kind of street when you're doing these. So one of the areas I think it can really speed up the whole implementation process is during the sales process. Some of the sales processes I'm involved in can go on for months while you're kind of deciding on which system to kind of go with, or just negotiations, or just things come up during it that distract you from that process. There's a lot of work you could actually be doing around designing your chart of accounts. Kind of no matter what system you're going to move to, it's probably going to be very different to how your current chart of accounts is. And also then cleaning up your data, because if you are bringing in from different systems, combining that into one to move to this new system, a lot of work there. And ideally, you'd have all that done before you've started the project. So I would try to engage with the partner that you're going to be potentially working with. If it was us, like, we'd happily get involved, time, material, to just advise you on chart of accounts or how you should be cleaning up your data. And it's a lot of work that could be done, which will just speed up the implementation then. The other point is then, I think, find out the experience of the partner. So have they been an end user? I just find there's one thing understanding all the functionality of the system, and another actually how people will use it on a day-to-day basis. And how this can help if they have actually used the system is when you get to a point during the implementation, if you're not sure how you want it set up, this could drag out the implementation. But someone like ourselves, we can advise straight away, yeah, this is how we've done it in the past, so we've seen. So, and we can come to a decision quickly and continue the pace of the project, the implementation. And the final point around this is then if you've got multiple work streams, so maybe different integrations happening, maybe from Spendesk to NetSuite, those type, you might have multiple partners doing these the different streams. So you need to have someone internally coordinating those. There's no point saying we're on a rapid ERP implementation if the integrations are going to take 4 or 5 months. And if you don't have someone internally that can coordinate those, make sure to reach out to one of the partners, and probably the ERP partner, to coordinate that for you. Don't assume that they will be managing all of those for you, because it can have a massive effect on your timeline, especially if you're trying to do this rapidly. That's mine. Sorry, I'm having to mute. I'm having audio problems before the guys speak.
Thanks, Steve. So the next point I want to talk about is preparing your data for the migration. So this is an aspect of the project work stream that can often get overlooked because the focus is on the system configuration and design. So some of the key pointers are, when it comes to the data, the client at the end is responsible for this piece. The partner will load it for you, but the client needs to extract the information from the existing systems, cleanse it, and then reconcile it once it's in the new system. And this work stream runs in parallel and can start at the same time as the main system build. So it's important to note that the partner won't drive this process for you. It is your responsibility to drive this, and your internal project manager should be on top of this data stream along with other parts of the project. So you need to think of it in that this is your data that you're loading yourself into the system. You need to be comfortable it's populated correctly. You can generate reports using this data. So the partner will physically import it for you, but you need to own everything else around that and be reviewing and checking the end result in the system before you go live. So it's very important you start early on this because you don't want to be rushed doing the data at the end of the project. You want your main resources on your team focused on getting the cutover ready, training your end users so they're comfortable, and then guiding their team through the go live. You don't want them doing late nights of data reconciliation. So one of the benefits of an ERP is the ability to load large amounts of data in it, tag it with different segments, and then report on it in many different ways. So you do want to get a good amount of data in the systems for it to be useful for you. And you have the ability to load data in from prior years, so you can have some historical data. I know that can often be important if you know you'll be preparing for future fundraising or IPOs, and you want that analysis on customer trends or top customer spend going back several years. However, if you want to go live rapidly to start using the system in just a couple of months, you need to assess what's going to be important from a data perspective for day one. And the day one minimum, really all you need is your customers and your vendors records, an opening trial balance, and then your opening customer invoices and opening supplier invoices so that you can pay those suppliers, reconcile your bank account and start posting in the new system. All the historical information, such as prior trial balances or even line-by-line transactions going back, you can load that in after you're live. You can get comfortable with the system, and then in a separate project, start loading in historicals. If you do want to load the historicals, be ready for day one, you're going to need to resource this accordingly throughout the project. Potentially be ready to pause that stream if it's slipping and the data is not ready for go live, and go back to that minimum I just mentioned earlier. We've seen examples where the data got more difficult. It was not as cleansed as the client was expecting in their existing system, or wasn't prioritized over other tasks, and there's been a rush to load years of data into the system right before go live. Adds stress to the team, distracts them from other key aspects, And it might lead to extra cost if you then need your consulting partner to help load that data in to make up for that lost time. I think the tip there is be willing to start with the minimum and then add later. And in a rapid implementation, you want to ensure the data is being cleansed between the different systems. So time can be lost if the data that's provided to load is incorrect or incomplete, and then you're spending time with the partner fixing errors to try and get the data in correctly. For example, this could be ensuring your open subledgers for accounts receivable and accounts payable, they reconcile to the trial balance. Clear out any credits and transactions there which don't apply. Write off amounts you don't know that are sitting in unreconciled accounts. The cleaner the data, the better. And this exercise should be well underway before go live, finished several months before go live. And as Steve mentioned, you can start on this work even before you've chosen the ERP system because the principles are the same when moving onto a new accounting platform. So you start cleansing your contact lists. For example, do all the customers have email addresses? Because in the new system, you want to automatically have invoices be issued via email. Otherwise, this work might clash with the work you're trying to do at the important point of the project at go live. So we have supported some clients who had already been live on NetSuite and they were having trouble with reporting, and we went in and realized they had some large irreconcilable balances. They had to put a fudge in at go live just to get the trial balance in and live and posting, but it led to a lot of work down the track to try and unpick that. So it's an example of what can go wrong if these things aren't considered. Another point that I've seen come up on several projects to consider is if you are combining different databases, such as a CRM tool and then a finance version of the customers, very important to ensure you've cleansed that early on. Manage duplicates, because they get that same record might exist in the two systems and have a unique identifier to connect those customers between two systems. I have seen situations where there's a lot of work to then cleanse duplicates loaded into the ERP. Based on our experience as accountants and end users, we do put a lot of effort into ensuring the data migration is done well. We've got a lot of experience at it to help advise the client along the way, and I think it's one of our key strengths. And we can get hands-on to help with large data uploads if the client team doesn't have that resource. And just to finish off this section on an example of where it went very well, we had a client who didn't want to touch their old system ever again, wanted everything in NetSuite. This is going back 8 years worth of data. So from the very start of the project, we helped prepare an import file to map their old chart of accounts to NetSuite and map their data. We helped prepare a sample of 1 month of line-by-line data, importing old transactions as a journal entry. And then the client was able to import those 8 years of data, reconcile each year as they went. They completed that well before go live and had a smooth transition and had access to all this information from day one whenever they want to run any historical comparison reports.
We have a question. I don't know if you want to answer to it now, if you feel it's better to answer it at another time.
Maybe we can leave that one till the end.
Okay. Okay.
Something specifically about data. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So the next point around being agile. So as I said, our standard implementation is 4 months. So that's how what we've kind of landed on is how best to kind of get people live and getting the most out of the system. But we have started offering kind of faster go lives. But the key thing is to reduce the scope. So I think the first step is to if you really want a rapid go live, is to figure out what is the minimal viable product that you need from day one, and really scrutinize, does everything have to be there? For example, you might be moving from a system that doesn't have a PO process. So moving to this new ERP, you decided we want a PO process, but you haven't figured it out yet, and you never had it before. So you should weigh up whether you actually need to have that for day one, or if it's better to get live within a couple of months and then implement that section when you actually understand more of the features of the new ERP and have more of a handle on what your process could be, which kind of feeds into my second point then. So if you have decided you want everything, is to not get hung up on having every single thing there from day one. So if you get to if we're 2 months into the project and you're having trouble with, let's say, that same PO bill approval process, it might be better to park it and just say, well, okay, well, let's de-scope that from the initial go live, and we'll roll it out over the month or two after you've gone live. We had a client that they couldn't decide exactly how they wanted to, and as the more and more they use the system, they would change because they realized how much the power they could get out of their new system, but it delayed the project by 2 months. So you really should weigh up whether it's more important to get live and start getting that return on investment. You'll be getting kind of all the functionality you had before from your system, plus the additional things like consolidation. So you will be getting benefits, but maybe not everything from day one. And just implementing a system can be stressful, and de-scoping can help reduce that, in that there's going to be less that can go wrong if we've taken functionality out. So it makes the testing phase easier, or we have less to configure, and then the training that you'll go through is less as well, because there's less to learn. And so again, you get live quicker, you're getting the return on investment, and then you just keep adding those features afterwards, straight after. And that's that point.
Thanks, Steve. So the next point is around building a strong project team and giving that team the capacity to focus on the project. In an ideal world, your implementation partner will be working with a dedicated resource on the client side who's only focused on this project. We understand that due to cost, or the fact that the person who's having the input and decisions, say, is your controller who also has other activities to do, we understand this isn't always possible. So therefore, it's very important that the resources that are available have the autonomy to make key decisions rapidly during the project around different design configuration options. And they can also swiftly respond to any queries that are raised, so that decisions can be made and then the next step in a task can be done. Also having time to prepare for the data, testing the system thoroughly before go live. So it's important then, as the management in the organization and the sponsors of the project, they help clear any competing priorities for the project team. I do see often that other issues pop up, and I know in a fast-growing business, you've got a lot of requirements around audits, fundraising, reporting, and budget preparation. And when these run in parallel, when you're trying to implement, that will be difficult because those resources then get pulled onto the other project, which will cause delays. And so in my experience, leading the delivery of the project, so probably the #1 reason that projects get delayed is that the client side do not have time to focus on the implementation project because of other priorities that have popped up. So within your project team, you don't need, when you're resourcing and choosing the right person to lead it from your side, they don't need to have experience of this ERP system that you've chosen, but they're important they are available. And I think it's also important that they'll be a champion of this change. They've got curiosity about what the new system can do and the new features it has. And so you want them to really take that on board and explore the functionality, be a champion internally, be able to then your partner will help train that person who can then train your users and sit with them day to day as they're using the new system. And when you've got that person showing end users who might be a bit resistant to change, if they are showing them the benefits of the system and how it's going to help them in their job, then that helps the whole organization change and adopt the new system. So the next point is on considering your reporting requirements. So it's good to, at the start of the project, you should take the time out to consider what your reporting is going to be in the new system. Like, what can't you get in terms of cutting and slicing and dicing, the data that you have currently. And it's good to then think about that up front when you're actually designing the initial configuration of the system, so that your partner can help you design that to achieve those goals. So you should think about that early on. And then during the testing phase, we think it's important to load some test sample data so you can start looking at what the reports will look like. Looking at how the reporting is produced can maybe point to some issues in the configuration that aren't correct yet. Perhaps transactions aren't being posted to the GL account you were expecting. So the earlier you find these things, the quicker they can be resolved, leading to a faster, smoother go live. We've seen examples where the reporting is not being considered until after they're live, assuming that the out-of-the-box reports will meet all their requirements. This can sometimes lead to change requests or changing of reports where you then have to go back and edit the data or edit the configuration, and that can then sour the experience of the implementation. And also, if you are going to be bringing in historical data for comparatives and you're starting that early on in the project, you need to think about, what data do I need for my future reporting? What will my investors be asking for? What will management want to see? Am I bringing in that right level of data from my old system to provide that? You don't want to have to then go back and modify the data imports after your life.
Cool. And just a final point, and it's more just a general implementation kind of point, but it can have an effect on timelines. So around developing and training change management plan. So one of the most important things is to make sure there's a main decision maker within the team that for the implementation, so that when we come to maybe a tricky decision on how something should be configured, that decision can be made quickly, and also that the person has probably enough leadership within the team that they can make sure that the team is on board as well and address issues like testing not being done, or just again decisions not being made quick enough to make sure that we hit the go live. It's very hard for us we do our best to drive the timeline that you've asked us to kind of hit, but it does require the customer to kind of make sure that they're pushing their team as well and making sure there's no blockers from us achieving that. Another thing then is within the testing and training, so we do a lot of our testing training while you test the system, but we've found some clients will just do the standard tests and not actually how they're going to use the system. So really, when you're doing your test, you should try and break the system. Do everything that you will be doing from day one, because that will find any of the issues during the implementation, and again be able to configure them quicker, get you live quicker, and you'll be kind of getting the most out of the system. If you just test the standard functionality, on day one you're going to start doing things, you're going to start doing reporting, you're not going to be able to get it. You're going to be frustrated. There's also other things happening around go live, and we should be trying to reduce as much of the headache around the actual go live time. And then also, if you're bringing integrations to other systems, maybe a CRM like Salesforce into your ERP, you should make, and there's a lot of work going on in Salesforce, you should have an internal change management board to make sure that any of the changes you're making in Salesforce don't affect anything that you've decided you're going to do with NetSuite. So just to make sure everyone's aligned on that when you're designing, because again, we've ran into issues with this where no one considers, sales don't really care how finance end up doing their work. So they're not going to be thinking about that when they implement the change. So you need to be looking at it the whole way through to make sure, again, to keep everything as successful as it can be. That's all our slides, all our points.
That's pretty good. So now I think we can answer a couple of questions. I think that was the most upvoted, and that really comes often is the one from Jonas asking, what is the right size for companies to start an ERP implementation? I know sometimes it's not really about the size, it's more about some triggers. It's going to be about the amount of payments, for example. Maybe we can answer, Jonas.
Sure, I can start on that one. So I would recommend, size-wise, it's ideal to move to the ERP before you experience the growth that you're planning to hit. So have all your processes in place and that project out of the way before you start getting really busy with the growth you foresee. I think some of the key advantages of an ERP is the ability to consolidate your data across multiple subsidiaries, to have each of the sort of local country requirements catered for within that ERP system. I think the right size is when you are starting to expand, and especially in Europe, when the business expands, it means moving to new jurisdictions. And if you're starting to see that expansion creating extra work for your team to manually meet local reporting requirements and consolidate to produce results, that's when you should really be thinking about moving to an ERP. And also, if the scale of the volume of your transactions is rapidly increasing and your current system can't handle that, an ERP platform will be able to handle a very high volume in transactions. So if you do have those growth plans, I'd recommend that's the right time to start thinking about the ERP project. not after you've already expanded and had to build out a big finance team to deal with the manual work.
Yeah, I do get asked that question all the time through the sales process, and we've done it for teams who are they're small and they're they're doing it in anticipation of the growth that they're about to go through, and they're really fast growing. And obviously coming out of the pandemic, there are some businesses that are growing massively, really quickly. And as Ross kind of said, you kind of have to weigh up a little bit. You might not 100% need it right now, but you might have the time to do it now, as opposed to if you wait a year when actually that growth really starts to kick in and everyone's really busy with other things then, and you're having to, it's almost too late. The headache has already come in. Those reasons that you thought you might have to change are now they're actual pain points, and it does become a bit more difficult then. There is no perfect answer to this, unfortunately. I'm sure we'd be pretty wealthy at this stage if we could share, if we could answer that question for people. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not.
And do you have any examples? Because that's another question from Jonas, where basically the implementation was started too late and there were consequences.
I've got examples of where the finance team is already so busy going through funding rounds, board reporting, and they just absolutely flat out and can barely dedicate any time to the project. So then the project just sort of delays and sits there. We have to sometimes pause the project and pick it up again later. So it's sort of back to that point of getting in early before you get busy with the other activities. And there are other customers I've seen where they've just got such a high volume of transactions, they're just not processing it accurately, and their accounts aren't always correct. They can't reconcile balances, so there are potentially questions around the quality of the accounts that they're producing due to that not being able to control it in a governed manner.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to
add. We have another question asking how important is the blueprint stage for implementing any ERP? Above all, managing your existing business requirements with a new ERP is very difficult. It's an important task. What things can be done to minimize such concerns?
I'll do that one. So, yeah, it is obviously important to kind of scope what your requirements prior to kind of starting the project. We have seen though some clients preparing RFP documents and spending quite a bit of time and money actually preparing it, but they're not at the size that actually it really matters. And I can't speak for all systems, so I can really only talk about NetSuite, but there's a big push from a NetSuite perspective to take their best practices. So it doesn't really matter how you do your own process right now. You're kind of agreeing with Suite Success to use some of their practices. And most people are actually happy for this because they're like, well, we don't have a very good practice. That's why we want to move to a new system. So I would, before maybe spending a load of time understanding your own processes and documenting them, it's probably worth almost seeing what a system like NetSuite. I'm sure the other systems have these kind of methodologies as well now. It's almost seeing what best practices are they going to give you once you're live, and whether you're happy with that before spending an entire time documenting everything you're doing right now, when in reality you're probably not going to do that in a new system. Because if everything was working beforehand, you probably wouldn't move. I don't know if that answers that question.
I think I would add that if you were analysing your own business processes, I think just focus on the tasks you think are the most manual and time-consuming to do. And then when you speak to different ERP providers, understand how they can automate that task. And then you can help build that business case internally for all these manual things we do today. The new system will automate that. This is why I think we should upgrade to an ERP. So I think focus on your pain points and why they're difficult, and then try and find out from the providers how they're going to help you automate that problem.
We have kind of a follow-up question from Lee. To what extent would you recommend using NetSuite VS integrating other applications. He gives an example. He says, would it be better for FMCG business to use a NetSuite inventory management module or to integrate a best-in-class inventory management application?
So it kind of depends on which modules we're talking about. Again, with all systems, when you're selling an ERP, you're doing a bit of everything. It isn't, if you do actually analyze those individual modules versus the best in class is going to be better. It is kind of hard to say for your specific example. I would say go with the external best in class. There's specific things where you really don't want things to go wrong. And so I would definitely be looking at other systems. We're implementing for a company at the moment that we're using the kind of external add-on for NetSuite for their warehouse management. So again, because it is best in class. So I definitely think, but there are, again, it's to speak to the partner about like specifics on which ones, and they can recommend whether they think NetSuites will suffice for your requirements or whether it's best to go with one of the partners. NetSuite, for example, again, I'm sure it's the same with the others, have lots of different add-ins and lots of different partners that they work with that already have off-the-shelf connectors too. So it's basically like you're working in NetSuite.
I think I would add, there might be different best in class for everything, but then if you do want to integrate these different tools with the ERP like NetSuite at the heart, it then does mean a bit of a spaghetti of different systems to then manage, and an IT manager to manage those. So you sort of weigh that off, and maybe for one particular module, we'll go for an external and integrate, but everything else in the ERP meets our needs. And so let's actually stick with the ERP because that's far simpler to manage in the long run. And also when you are exploring, ask the other application and the ERP provider, is there a ready-made integration or connector that's out of the box, or does it need a bespoke connection built? Because that then would mean more work, and so you probably wouldn't go for that connection to that third-party app if that work wasn't worth it.
We have a question from Laura, who is asking, she heard that NetSuite doesn't really offer an off-the-shelf model, and that a lot of work goes in the background to make sure that your business fits NetSuite. Is that the case? I've heard similar feedback to Laura.
I would say that with the suite success, I think it does for most of the process areas. If you're a fast-growing business, and as Steve said, your processes aren't that embedded, it will meet most of your requirements. But if you then have something that's quite custom and that you want to stick to that process, you may need to go through an exercise of scoping that out, like preparing the blueprint and building a custom solution inside the ERP. I think from my experience, why people are attracted to NetSuite because they can take a lot of it off the shelf, and then most of the project is testing that works for you, training, data migration, and then moving through the go live process. And a lot less time can be spent on actually configuring and building and testing a bespoke solution.
Yeah, and for me, the benefit of the off-the-shelf solution is more just the reports and dashboards being there. You see them in a demo. They're actually there when we just unbundle it, which is just the initial kind of setup. Having systems in the past, when I was implementing those, you'd end up implementing, you'd see the demo, you'd be, oh, that's brilliant, and then you'd start the project. It's a blank slate system. You build all your processes. Things come up during it. You need extra training, etc. You're about to go live, and it's like, okay, now when do we get the dashboards and the reports? And it's like, oh, you're out of budget now, because it is kind of the last thing you get to. So having those. The biggest benefit is actually just having those there, and it kind of cuts our costs basically in half and those timelines in half, because we don't have to do a lot of that stuff. But it does depend on you. Can those best practices work for your business? Which it won't be the case for everybody, and that is why when we do an implementation, it's not the pure off the shelf. We do additional scoping at the start to kind of make sure. that it is. So we're not going to just try and force you onto those processes if we know that it wouldn't be the best for your business.
We have a question from Bruno, who's asking that they first need, I guess, at his company to select which ERP he will be implemented. So he's asking, what is the process to do that, and what resources, internal and external, does he need for the selection?
So I've worked with a lot of businesses who it's just the financial controller. It depends what type of business you're in, Bruno. We work with a lot of software clients, and it's typically a pretty standard implementation that they need. They'll have their own bespoke system for doing maybe their sales, etc., that they need integrated. But most of what they use for the system is pretty standard. So just working with the financial controller or CFO is fine in that case. If it's not, so if it's inventory, etc., then there are obviously companies out there. I'd love to say we'll do it, but we do have a very NetSuite focus. We would try and be independent when advising, but we're obviously very NetSuite focused. But there are partners out there who you can, who I've seen on LinkedIn recently, that can come in and advise and have used multiple different systems to help you kind of make that decision. And so it depends on the size. So if you're a kind of fast growing startup, I probably wouldn't be spending a fortune kind of getting this advice on how to use it. But if you are quite a big business, established processes, then it could help to get someone in to help scope those processes and make that decision on what the best ERP is. Because there are obviously advantages to the different systems. They each have better qualities than the other. So.
I think something I'll add that I see once we're delivering the project is it might just be the senior management had some demos of the system and they maybe don't understand the intricacies of their own processes, and they were happy with what they saw in the demo. And then when we start working with the team who use it, they're like, this doesn't fit our needs. It needs to do this. And they ask, well, why I wasn't involved in these initial calls when we talked about what system we needed. So I think in terms of what internal resources you need, involve the subject matter experts for each process area. Is it someone from operations and someone from finance, and maybe someone from financial planning and reporting, or your BI insights team around what analytics they need? Have them all involved in the demos of the software as you go. You could prepare like a survey questionnaire that they could each populate, giving a rating for the different aspects of the system, which then the CFO can weigh off the benefits of the system versus the cost of that system to help inform the decision. And if they're involved up front and they're contributing to those decisions, then they are more accountable to the system, but they'll also champion that system through the implementation.
Jonas was asking, do you actually have guidelines to gather this company-wide requirements that you were talking about? Because he said that currently it seems only finance is pushing for an ERP implementation.
So is this like something that you could then take away to help analyze your own business? But we have within NetSuite's methodology, there are a lot of some questions that will be asked during the alignment process or the sales process, which would then consider all the different aspects of the organization to understand, do you need this functionality? And that's like a very detailed list that would be worked through with the NetSuite sales rep and the partner to help understand those requirements. So I think it is important, if finance is pushing for the ERP, to involve someone from operations and sales and other parts of the business to have input into that design and to make sure they're being asked questions about that part of the ERP, and will that piece of functionality meet their requirements as well.
Prior to starting MacroFin, I used to do contracting, going around like fixing month end for teams, and as part of that, and also just looking at systems, I would go, if I'd be looking at the pain points of finance, but I would go to sales, operations, work with those teams to kind of see how they document their processes, try and spot the inefficiencies with those, and so that you can kind of come back with a business case to show senior management, this is how much time you're wasting here in operations. Here's how this new system can fix that. For sales, here's what they're doing. And then for finance as well. Obviously, I was a very finance-focused person being an accountant, so I always empathize more with that. But I always wanted a system that would work the whole way through the business. So I want to create those efficiencies for everyone. So I think if it is just finance pushing for it, then I think someone needs to go around these other teams, see how they're actually doing stuff, and document it and put that as part of your business case as well. I don't have a strict guideline on it, though, that I can provide.
We have another question. Do you know to which extent the CRM and marketing automations from the NetSuite are enough? Or at which point should a company integrate a more developed CRM tool?
For the CRM, if you don't have a CRM system, then because NetSuite use the CRM module themselves, it should be enough for you. If you're coming from Salesforce, again, like our conversation earlier, the best in class, I wouldn't move from Salesforce because you've got a lot of salespeople. I don't know how many are on this call, but you don't want to upset your salespeople too much by forcing a new system on them that Salesforce integrates so well with NetSuite that there would be no point doing it. If you're using HubSpot as well, like that comes up a lot, integrating that. So I do find if you don't really have a process, it's part of your license and it's really easy for us to implement. So it is definitely worth looking at. But if you do have quite a large sales team that is used to it, I would be going with, I would stick with that system. But yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. The marketing, I personally would go with an external tool. And I know, oh God, I've forgotten the name of the one that NetSuite has. So they bought a tool that you can add on, Bronto, to get. So just as part of the ERP, it's quite limited in that you can track campaigns, you can send newsletters, etc. But I think for most people who, if they're worried about marketing, that won't be enough, and they will need a dedicated tool for marketing, which they can either look at Bronto or just integrate something else into. As a NetSuite integrates so easily with those systems that it's that you should definitely consider it.
I saw a question there from Emily around what an internal change management board should look like. I think this is a very important one, especially when you've got not just finance involved and there's sales and operations. So I'll answer, and Steve, you can add. So I think firstly you need, in this situation with multiple parts of business involved, one project manager on your side who is responsible for it all. They're capturing all the requirements that are being produced from the SMEs in that business unit and being advised to the partner. They're capturing all of these, and you're identifying where there's inconsistencies in the messaging. So that one person needs to be across it all. You should have representatives from each of these parts of the business. There should be, I think, the leads from those business. So you have the CFO and the head of operations and head of sales. And then for the subject matter expert who you've allocated as the person who knows the business process the best and is championing that within. And so then when there are decisions that maybe sales are making upstream for how they want to design the CRM, which will have an impact downstream to fulfillment and finance, these decisions should be raised on these change management boards, held monthly throughout the project. Make sure all parties are comfortable with the impact and the trade-offs are considered. It might be this will make sales' job really easy to do it this way, but it's going to be a nightmare for finance. So finance needs to push back on that to find the best decision for the overall organization. Make sure that change is agreed. I'd definitely document it, provide that back to the partner to advise them what they're building. And then down the line, if people have forgotten what was agreed at the time or aren't happy with the solution, you've at least got that evidence and trail for why the organization decided to do it this way. There was a reason that we chose this option. Holistically, it's better for the organization, even if it's not the best for one particular department.
We have a question from Jacob asking, what are the minimal additional tools, according to you, you need in combination with NetSuite for finance and accounting? Because he heard that you need something for account payables and bank reconciliation in addition.
So we've actually started recommending Fast4 for bank reconciliation, basically with all our clients now. The NetSuite bank rec functionality does do a lot, and it's being added to all the time. But we found, especially if you're coming from zero, where the bank reconciliation works pretty well, you might not get quite as much from the standard NetSuite. And Fast4 have built a bank reconciliation tool that basically looks like you're inside NetSuite anyway, and has a lot more functionality with custom matching, etc. So we do, and it's a pretty cheap tool to actually get. As a license cost. So we've just started recommending that to people. For accounts payable, I'm not 100% sure what they mean. Is it for approvals, or for approvals that can live within NetSuite pretty easily? If they're talking about scanning, OCR scanning, yes, you will need another tool because NetSuite doesn't have it natively. But again, they've got multiple partners, Fast4 also being one for that tool as well. But there is other ones for the scanning too that you can get. But that would be the OCRs. You only really need that if you've got lots and lots of builds coming in. Because most companies will actually switch to a PO model when they switch to NetSuite. The fact of creating the PO and then converting the PO to a bill will actually speed up the process a lot anyway, that you'll get a lot of value from that and might not need the scanning because you'll have already saved a lot of time. So the bank rec one is really the only one that we recommend, just as I said, because it's cheap and it does add a lot. And we're accountants at the end of the day, so we understand the pain of a bank rec. So yeah.
We have another question, someone that says that their previous ERP became slow, so they collected a new one, but their previous data could not be updated in the new one, and asking basically how can they advance now? Very specific.
So that kind of extracting and importing data, it's something I got quite hands-on several projects over the last few years. So you just have to take a very structured approach to it and identify what, say, searches or reports you can generate to extract the information out of the old system. Sometimes it can be quite hard to get it nice and clean. So we've got to identify the best way to extract it. I'll start with just getting some sample transactions and then review all the fields that you need to map into NetSuite and build out like a mapping table from the old system to the new system. You might do this in a spreadsheet and have some Excel VLOOKUP formulas to cross-check. It was this field or this customer ID in this system. Now I need to cross-check it to another system to make sure I'm loading it to NetSuite correctly. So you build that Excel model, and then you practice extracting the data, populating it, importing it to NetSuite. Cross-check, does that work? Is it posted? Yeah, it worked for one transaction. Now I'll try 100. Now I'll try a whole month's worth. And then when you're happy that works, you can quite rapidly get through loading the rest of the data. But often the challenge is just getting. Sorry, Steve.
I was just going to say, if the challenge is actually getting the data from your other system, then maybe the reports that you can get just aren't good enough, or they're not in a format that can be then imported easily. Some systems will allow you to connect to the actual database. When I used to work with Sage 50, I would always just build a connection through Excel directly to the database and pull all the information in. And that's what I used. It's what I used to do on my reporting. But it's when I was then moving from that system, I would just be pulling straight from the database, creating my imports, and then pushing in. So it might be something that, without knowing the systems or anything, it might be worth seeing. Is there another way to access the data that maybe someone can help with?
We have two last questions. So one question is, how much time do you spend at the customer? And Xavier is specifying that he's in Belgium.
Not as much as we used to. So one of the key things that we had when we were starting is that we would be on site a lot, doing the scoping, doing the training, even there at go live if we thought there was a risk. Since the pandemic started, we haven't been at any clients, and with everything being cloud-based, that we've kind of got used to working. As this starts to ease down, yes, we may start to do that, maybe less than we initially kind of thought. But Ross, for example, has been to Amsterdam. He's been to Berlin. He's worked with clients over there as well. So, yeah, we've traveled around Europe kind of with clients as well.
And you might have another person interested. Oliver is asking, do you have completed projects with fast-paced B2C companies that sell physical goods, multiplying online web shops, warehouse management, pick and pack application, inventory management?
We're working with one at the moment. So we've worked with a lot of clients because obviously that's kind of, a lot of those businesses were affected by the pandemic. There hasn't been as much sales that we've been involved with in NetSuite. That area definitely slowed down. But we're working with one at the moment. We've worked in the past with a number of clients who are live and have maybe had a few issues. We're fixing them. So we do have the skills in-house to deliver that. But yeah, not as much as we have with the software, because obviously a lot of software businesses have been booming during the pandemic. So a lot of our clients over the last year have been that.
And we have one last question from Boone asking, do you have an integration between the Spendesk and NetSuite? You may have an answer, and I may have an answer for you too. So I'll let you answer.
Well, I was going to say, not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure it could be built, but I'm not aware of an off-the-shelf one.
We are building one, so stay tuned. We will be communicated it very soon, but it is definitely one of our priorities on our roadmap on our side. Well, it's 7, so maybe no last questions asking around. If you have a question, you have 10 seconds to write it down and we'll try to answer it. If not, I would like to thank a lot Steve and Ross for your time, the presentation, and answering all those questions. I hope the audience found it useful. We will share the replay of the event. We will also share the contacts of Steve and Ross. So if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to them. And if you're interested in the subject and want to know more or deep dive more, feel free to reach out to the CFO Connect team too. To make sure to make it happen. Well, thanks a lot, Ross and Steve. It was a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's yeah, always happy to contribute to the community and help people along this journey. Because once you move to an ERP system, it should be the last time you have to move, and you should grow with your business if you do it well.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye or day.